Hello, coaches. Welcome to Daily Locker Room Sports podcast. Again, we've got Ryan and Daniel back here today for a look at the weekend's action. Obviously, the talking point of the weekend, lads, is the end of an era for this Dublin team. You're probably looking at the likes of Stephen Cluxton, James McCarthy, Mick Fitzsimmons. Players that absolutely owe nothing to the Dublin jersey and owe nothing to the game either. Phenomenal servants. Multiple All Ireland winners, and one of the greatest teams of our generation that we've ever seen, lads. Unfortunately for them, it's the end of the road. But for Galway, a mammoth win, Ryan. The one standout thing for me, Ryan, I'm just looking at the team sheet here, the Galway team sheet. Like the one standout thing for me here, Ryan, is the physicality and size that Galway possess, particularly across their half forward line. Like you're looking at a half forward line there of Kenny McDaid, John Maher, Matthew Tierney. Like those guys are all 6'2". They're nearly those guys are equally as good at midfield in any team in the country. Like, and then you've obviously got the likes of Conroy in the middle as well. Like a serious size in the team, Ryan. But add in that the Stardust, you've got Comer, you've got Walsh. But the flexibility in their scores too, Ryan, that an impact coming off the bench, that 4 points coming off the bench, Johnny Heaney, Tom O'Callaghan, Kieran Dorsey, coming off the bench as well, a real deep bench. Probably the biggest worry for them moving forward is the injury to Walsh, but certainly Ryan Saturday night, it was a phenomenal performance from them,
It was a
particularly in the
savage,
second half.
yeah, it was a savage win, Stephen. I think a lot of us knew that Galway have loads of potential. But probably going into the game, we just felt that they weren't at the level that they potentially could be because they had obviously a few injuries. We were wondering Comer, where was he at? Shane Walsh was another. So for them to get that win, they deserve massive credit. They found a way to win. The thing about us is we're always talking about Galway's flair players, and they're outstanding. They've always natural footballers. They're great to watch Galway when they're in full flow. But defensively, I feel they've really tightened up. They're steely in defence, and I suppose that reflected also the way that they held the Dublin forward line. Like I'm looking here, Mannion only scored 1 point, was taken off. Jack McCaffrey, who can beat teams on his own. He was held scoreless. Galway obviously had someone that could match his pace and power. Scully was scoreless. Kilkenny on his day could kick 4 or 5 points in Croke Park. He was held to 2 points, and James McCarthy scoreless. Fenton, like that was another one we were worried going into the game. Would Conroy have the legs to go with Fenton? Obviously, Joyce and his backroom team, they went with Maher. And the thing about John Maher is his enthusiasm, his energy, his work rate, his desire to do whatever it takes for the team. He deserves massive credit. Like he's a real warrior for Galway, and he held Fenton to 1 point. So look, the size is massive that Galway have. We all know that they're class forwards, but I thought they were willing to roll up the sleeves and really disturb Dublin's free flowing football. And I think that was a winning of the game for me.
And Ledge, how much do you think, Ledge, the result against Mayo, in Hyde Park that day? I would say there was probably an element of Galway getting a real sense of satisfaction from seeing Mayo taking Dublin to the brink. Again, Mayo, let's be honest, Ledge should have probably won. And then pathways might have been different for both teams. But how much of a lift would that have give Galway, and how much would Galway have learned from that performance?
Yeah, but before we start, I have a patio going in out the back here, so if you hear an angle grinder going, you know what it is.
Ledge, you can't hide money, boss. You can't hide the money. Fair play to you, but that's the third. Are you in the West Wing? Are you in the West Wing of the house today, or the East Wing?
I'm in the living quarters.
All right, okay, right.
I have a 2-year-old asleep in the other quarters, so I'm trying to balance everything there. But no, come here. Look, it would have given them a certain amount of satisfaction. I'd say Galway were so wrapped up in trying to get themselves right for a quarter final post Monaghan. I'd say they had no other focus on anything else. Like I know that Comer only trained the Thursday or the Wednesday and kind of was sore next morning afterwards. I was talking to a couple of lads, and Walsh was under severe pressure from the Monaghan game as well. So they were properly patched up going into that game. And look, I think Galway, like we've talked before about Galway having the tools. I didn't know, did they have the energy? Did they have was everyone fit enough? I think when they saw McCarthy starting, McCaffrey starting, Mannion starting, I think straight away, in my head anyway, I was thinking, that's a big fill-up for Galway, because Dublin obviously felt there was a bit of a weakness from the Mayo game. They started James McCarthy, who's taped together, has barely played more than 20, 30 minutes of football throughout the summer, spring. McCaffrey, who I think is a 20-minute player, he's a little explosive rocket. I'm not sure he's a full 70 player anymore. And Mannion has been kind of in and out of the team. So straight away, I think Dublin stripped their bench altogether. Dublin had very little to bring in. And I think Galway took good solace from that. And it's something interesting for the weekend. Like all 4 teams playing into the hill in whichever half they played really struggled. So I think Dublin needed to be a small bit more ahead because there was a significant enough win there. And I think when Galway were within touching distance, I think they smelled something. And I thought Galway's bench had a massive impact, like Johnny Heaney, Thomas Cullihan. And the biggest thing for me, right, was in the first half, I thought Galway were under severe pressure on their own kickouts. I thought Fenton and Maher were having a little battle. They kept each other out. They tried to hit Comer with a couple. But when Keane Darcy came in, and I said this about in the Armagh game as well, when he went off, he was a loss on kickouts. When he came in, he took Fenton's attention totally because he's a massive kickout target. That allowed a little bit more space to free up for Galway to hit. So I think that was a massive change. And even though Sean Kelly was a huge loss, you brought another really, and Ryan used the word enthusiastic about John Maher. I think Keane Darcy and John Maher are 2 absolute dogs who just want to work. And I think ultimately they ran the legs off Dublin. And look, I think Dublin had a couple of chances in the last few minutes that probably the Dublin of 4 or 5 years ago would have game managed that much better. I thought Dublin's game management was really poor, and Galway's wasn't much better. But in fairness, I think Galway were full value for it. And look, it was probably the highest quality game of the weekend, I thought.
Yeah, no, it definitely was. And I suppose, Ryan, just to back up what Daniel said there about, the Galway sniffing blood and smelling an opportunity. The signs were probably there for a while about Dublin. We're sort of waiting, Dublin's time in their run. They're not peaking just yet for Leinster. And there was times in Leinster as well, Ryan, even that game against Louth in the Leinster final. Like Louth were very, very close to disrupting them. That one kick out went wrong for Louth. It put a 4-point cushion in the game. It's a long time since you've probably seen, at Louth getting within touching distance of Dublin, a Leinster final as close as such, and maybe the warning signs were there, at that stage as well. Obviously, the defeat against Derry in the National League final, who we went on to see how Derry collapsed, spectacularly after that, and we'll chat about later in the show. But I certainly feel the signs were also there from Galway, Ryan. Like, they've now played 7 championship games and they're unbeaten. The draw against Armagh, and they probably found themselves a tad unfortunate to go into this game. But it's interesting because out of the 4 games at the weekend, Ryan, Galway were the only team that came through with the extra game who actually won. The other 3 teams, Kerry, Donegal and Armagh, who came in fresh, were the teams that obviously, but I think a large part of that for me is I don't think it's timing of Galway's run. I think it's luck, Ryan. I think the fact that they had so many injuries early in the year, these men are coming back in and they're fresh. They're actually fresh.
Aye, definitely, Stephen. Look, firstly on the Dublin team, like these boys, it had to come to an end at some stage. And probably when you reflect, am I right in saying Dublin have really now only won 1 of the last 4 All-Irelands? 2001, Tyrone, 2021, Tyrone, 22 was Kerry, where they got beat by a late Sean O'Shea score. Last year they won it, and then now this year they're not going to be in the final. So they probably, if we do reflect and take a step back, we were saying, look, Dublin were slipping and the rest of the pack were getting a bit closer. Now, the big thing from a Galway point of view is that I suppose they take advantage now of beating Dublin. Like Mayo beat them a couple of years ago and then they slipped up and didn't win the All-Ireland. I think Galway will need to now kick on. Time and momentum is great, but I do feel Comer he's still off it. You would know that he hasn't played enough football as much as Joyce would have liked. Shane Walsh, Dan mentioned maybe he's carrying a few injuries. He was excellent the weekend, but he still had to go off. And I feel if Galway want to go the whole way, they need Comer getting up through the levels. They'll be delighted to get 2 weeks now. They need Walsh flying. I was looking there, Sean Kelly still probably hasn't found the form that we know he can. Who has Rob Finnerty was taken off. I know he's had a championship and he's really stood up when the other boys have been missing. But if Galway want to go the whole way, they need all their top players firing. Now, the only thing, Stephen, as well, you make a good point about all the other teams that had to play an extra game didn't come through. But in fairness, Derry have had a scrappy championship. Louth have overachieved. They've done excellent. So we were probably expecting them to lose anyway. And then Roscommon was the other team who had a really scrappy championship. Yeah. On the flip side, Galway, as you said, they've been unbeaten. So I think Galway definitely deserve their place in the All-Ireland semi-final.
Yeah, and I suppose, Ledge, from the point of view of the Dubs, they owe the game nothing. Those guys, like, they were phenomenal servants, and you'll probably see, a few retirement stays he might go as well. Who knows? But it's certainly, Ledge, now looking like a little bit of a rebuilding job. And if teams in Leinster, thought that they were, a million miles away from them, maybe all of a sudden now teams might be thinking, well, do you know what? We could have a cut at them, and you never know, if we set up well and everything goes right for us, we can actually make it a really, really competitive game. And they might just see Dublin come back into that pack, Ledge. But I definitely did midfield at the start of the year, I thought that they would probably still win it. Looking at what was in the country at the minute, but certainly over the last number of weeks, it's become very clear that it's probably the most widest open All Ireland in a long time. But Les, from a Dublin point of view, the tributes for those guys are they'd be endless.
Yeah, and they are, in fairness to them, they're generational players like those. I think we all know that the 4 or 5 we're talking about.
Well, this is what I want to ask, right? I'm going to ask you this, right? Well, so that's an interesting line. So, generation players, we used to sort of laugh and, snigger at this, when the Sunday game used to say, Pat Gilroy came on one night and talked about this golden generation. You're going, well, you wise up. But technically, when you actually look at what's coming in to replace them, they're still real good footballers, don't get me wrong, but they're not on that level. Like that was a serious level of players, like, the likes of McCarthy. Obviously you had Brogan, those guys. Like, you had a phenomenal conveyor belt of talent that came through there for a long time, and that's just maybe starting to dry up. You've seen it at underage level, haven't you? It's sort of starting to dry up a wee bit, is it?
Yeah, well, you can see like even Loud winning this year underage. Like you've Kildare, Meath, the last number of under-20s and minors. Like, so there is more of a spread. Like Dublin will always be a top 4 side. Like that, we're not saying that they're going back into completely going back into the back. They'll always be good enough to be a top 4 side. But definitely, I mean, and again, it's not necessarily just the skill and the that kind of stuff of these players. It's more so the personality, the driving force these lads were. Like I obviously know Cluxton close enough. Like I can see what he would. I see what he brings to his tap room. I know what he'd bring to a team. Like it's massively it's massively underrated what these lads do off the field. Like James McCarthy, the same. Like what an absolute leader. Like there's lots of footballers that are kind of not a million miles away from these lads, but it's the standards they set, even like on the training pitch and how they behave outside of that, and I think that's what, let's say, after that COVID Ireland, when Mayo bet them the following year, I think the rebuild needed to start then, but they kind of went back and they brought the band back together for another year, and I think last year was a bonus one for them, as Ryan kind of said. I think they probably should have left it last year, like go out on a sweet note. I still think if they probably met any of the other teams, I still think that they might have scraped over the line. As you said, were they periodising their training? Were they getting ready? I was expecting something different for them from the Mayo game. I thought they were in a really good place to go and push on, but the kick never came. And by the end of it, they looked a tired team. And look, as I say, I genuinely do think some of those guys are generational. I really do, and it'll be a tough rebuild because there'll always be expectation there. And whoever gets the job next, if Desi does step down, like I don't know, I hope Loud don't lose another manager in Ger Brennan after a year again. That was the rumor mill going around after the match on Saturday. But it'll be a tricky gig for a couple of years for someone, I'd say.
And I suppose it's like any sport. Like you look at any team that's been successful, and me and you are both long suffering Man United fans. You look at the Ferguson era, and it ends, and those type of players, as Daniel talked about, generational players. Your Roy Keane's of this world. You're looking at Steven Cluxton, the standards that he sets. Like the more players that come through now. Like I was chatting to a couple of club managers earlier in the fold, and they were talking about bemoaning this sort of the modern player as such. And the young boys that are coming through now, and the lack of commitment and the willingness just to clear off and and go to Australia or whatever. And listen, every young person's entitled to spread their wings, and it's important you do that. Like, but players like Cluxton, like they're just simply irreplaceable. Like not even so much Ryan on the field, but as what Daniel says about the standards off the field. Like, and as you being a leader, a former leader, obviously with Fermanagh, like how important was it like to really keep your foot on a group? How important is it to have those characters, Ryan, in a changing room? I'd say people are probably crying out for a real high level of leadership. I think we're bereft of leaders in general in society. I think you even look at government, you look at the politics. Like there's not too many standout real candidate leaders. Like you look at even in America, they carry on like Trump and guys like this. Like they're not like the leaders that you would expect to be leading. And it's so important to have that quality of leadership in a group, isn't it? Like it really is.
Yeah, and I think that's what separated probably Dublin from the rest, Stephen, was that they had so many leaders. I'm thinking of Cluxton right out to Fitzsimons in front of him. In fairness to him, John Small plays on the edge, but he's got leadership qualities. He you just know by watching him that he's definitely one of these boys that wouldn't be afraid to speak his mind if it needs to be said. Fenton, McCarthy, even going right up through the forward line, Kieran Kilkenny, like they have so many leaders throughout their team, which if one of them was having an off day, more often than not, a couple of the rest of them were able to step up, roll up the sleeves and get the job done. And probably that's what separates them from why they've been so successful over the last 10, 11, 12 years compared to maybe some of the rest of the counties. Like I was thinking of Donegal there, for an example. You always felt if you took Murphy out of the game, did Donegal have enough other leaders to step up and be counted? We're even looking at Kerry when David Clifford is quiet, we would have questioned who else is going to really get them over the line. So look, they've been a phenomenal team. They probably will slip off now, them players, but they owe their county nothing. And like, geez, lads, like Tyrone were a dominant force in 2003. I'm thinking 2005, 2008. Yeah. But these boys have dominated the sport, and like Tyrone have such a good conveyor belt of underage as well coming through, that even if Dublin aren't at the top table for the next 3 or 4 years, so be it. Like they've delivered, and I feel now that every other county is probably saying, thank God that's the end of them.
Yeah, their legacy lives long, lads, in the memoirs of Gaelic games for sure. Like, and I suppose, lads, from that point of view, just backing up what Ryan says there, like, you were always a very, very solid leader, having coached you in the past. Like, I always felt your standards, like, and it's small things like lads, even just even small things like being there early. I know you told me like the sort of you hear the sort of mythical stories about Cluxon likes to arrive at training 2 hours in advance and stuff like that because he's a school teacher like yourself and finishes at 1 o'clock. But on a serious note, though, like on a serious note, like just that wee small thing, like being there an hour before training, being in the change rooms, getting your band work done, getting your foam rolling done, those wee small things are just so important, Daniel, in any group, isn't it? Like just those, because it's the small things that make the big things happen. Like,
yeah, I don't think that would have been for show either. I think that would have been to challenge the person underneath him to say, well, come and be better than me, come and put more effort into me than I am. I don't think it was just I don't think it was this kind of a facade to show how committed he was. I think that was just the way he did his business, and him especially. I'm sure there's lots of others, but all those things do add up. And if you're bringing in 4 or 5, I've talked about this a lot here on the podcast. If you're bringing in 4 or 5 new lads every year, and they see the big leaders, and as I said before, leaders can be good, leaders can be bad. If especially young lads see a good leader, they'll just copy what they do. They'll just follow through. If they see a leader who's in or out, who mightn't be necessarily a good leader, they'll copy that behavior. And I think that was the big thing. I think when that whole kind of Pat Gilroy sort of era flushed out an awful lot of lads and brought in the Fitzsimons, the Paul Flynns, as the Cluxon was already there, obviously, and the McCarthy's. When those lads so many of them came in a clut, and when they set a standard, then anyone that came in afterwards met that standard. And it's critical for a group like skills and football will kind of come and go, but I think it's that. It's not psychological, but it's just the standard that those boys brought. It just permeated everything, and then you could see it in games, and you could see it how they finished out games, and the way they executed simple skills. And look, I don't think you're going to see a team like it again for a long time. And it's kind of, it's ruined my head a little bit, because that Dublin team were so good. I'm looking at those 4 games over the weekend and I'm thinking, Jesus, the standard is awful. Yeah. But it's probably because we were so spoiled for so long with that team that were so good, like just so good. So look, I won't lie, it's made for an exciting summer. Like I know my Dublin friends might thank me, but like kind of you'd be glad they're out just so you can see the bit of giddiness in other teams. It'd be really interesting last semi-finals, I think.
Yeah, funny, like, because I was in Croke Park yesterday, and I was leaving. There was a lad walking in front of me, and he was actually from Tyrone, and he was bemoaning the state of the 2 games. That was fucking dire. He was shouting, that was shite, and he just roared at the top of his voice, bring back the Dubs, bring back the Dubs. And it is true, like, because they do bring that flair, they bring that glamour, and even the crowd as well. They fill the hill, and there's that atmosphere. And when that Come On You Boys in Blue starts, like it's nearly spine tingling, like when you're in the stadium, like and I'm sure it was the same for the players. But Ryan, like just touching on what Daniel said there, like you think of leaders and standards. Remember around about 2016, I was invited up to Skerries to do an Easter coaching camp, and Lindsay Davey, I think she was Dublin ladies captain, she was there, and Johnny Cooper. And there's me at the break time, eating buns and tea and cheese and ham sandwiches, and Cooper's pulling out his little homemade omelette that was delivered to him that morning and stuff, But he said, and this is the thing, and it's an interesting conversation with him. Like, he was actually a very nice guy to chat to, but an interesting conversation with him when he talked about, like, people on the outside think that we're training in these high tech facilities and we've got all this glamorous training. He says we actually don't. He says what we have is we've got 32, 33 players who are all fucking chomping for 1 to 15. So if I'm not on it at training, someone else is on it and someone else is in. He says, and if I have number 3 in my back, I am doing everything in my power in our in-house games and our training sessions to keep that jersey in our back. And I think of Roy Keane, and I think of how good a leader he was. And, people sort of question some of the things Keane done in his career. But I'm reading a book at the minute called The Mixer. and it's in a very interesting book about the evolution of tactics in the Premier League over since its inception in 1982. And it talks about new players that arrived at United, like Van Nistelrooy and these guys, and like they're talking about the standards in training, like the intensity in training, like 5-a-side match, Keane loses it and he's losing the fucking rag with the players he's playing with, like, and how important, right? Like that, surely to God, like people talked about Dublin, their biggest challenge for years was the A versus B games. But that quality, Ryan, is probably just not there at the minute. They have that sort of second 15 or nearly not at the level as the first 15. But certainly, Ryan, it's so important to have those standards, like so important.
Yeah, like the depth that they had when they were at their top, Stephen, was phenomenal. You could nearly have a bench coming off. You're thinking of even Kevin McManaman coming off the bench there, and he was as good as anyone starting. Dublin probably this last couple of years, and as you said, a lot of them players are still excellent footballers, but they're probably not at the same level that they had when they were really flying. Like I'm thinking of even that last pass, and Tom Lahiff gives it all, really, really good footballer. But that last pass, I think he went to square it across to James McCarthy with his left foot. And that probably broke Dublin. He overkicked it. McCarthy was reaching. All of a sudden, Tom O'Callaghan runs through, kicks over the bar with the left foot, and it just felt, you could see McCarthy, he couldn't even make up the ground. It just felt like that was the end of them. See, a couple of years ago, see that pass, that would have been on the money. And that's what I mean. I just feel that Dublin's players, they're probably not at the same level as what they were back, I'm thinking 2015, 16. Their bench isn't as strong. I've seen there that they've made a bigger impact coming off the bench maybe against Mayo than they did against Galway at the weekend. And maybe, as Dan says, that's because they started a stronger team. But look, Dublin they've great standards, Stephen, and I suppose that'll be the main thing now, that some of these so-called younger leaders can now maintain those standards and see, can they bring a couple more players in and get back to the top level again, because Cluxton and these boys were never going to be around forever. So I think that's the bottom line, that these standards, I suppose, continue on regardless of which players are there.
And while we're on the subject of leaders, Ledge, probably out of the last four, one of the greatest leaders that we've seen is Kieran McGeeney, and obviously he's led Armagh into their first semi-final in nearly 20 years, 19 years. For McGeeney, a massive monkey off his shoulder, monkey off his back. I would say, that those defeats, we've all suffered defeats, lads, as players, as coaches, we've all suffered defeats. We know what they're like, but those defeats in particular that he's had, they're crushing, they're actually, morally demoralizing how he lost those games. But for him to keep coming back, to keep taking the flack that he's taken, and I think he's a fairly thick-skinned man. I don't think he's trawling through social media looking for criticism of himself, but I don't think he really cares about it. But I was actually personally delighted for him to get to the semi-final, and it would be one team that I wouldn't begrudge winning the All-Ireland. Out of all four teams that are left, I would actually love to see Armagh win it, personally, just even for the way he's carried himself, the way he's handled himself. But from a standards point of view, Ledge, he has installed a serious level of belief and togetherness in that group. And funny, I'm just looking at my phone here. I was trying to dig it out for you, the picture. There was a picture of, I think, Brendan Monaghan, one of the local photographers here in Newry. Brendan be quite active on social media, saying there, Brendan took a great snap at the end of the game, and McGeeney's in the huddle, and you just see him talking. But it's the expression, Ryan and Daniel, of the rest of the players. They're just glued to him, every one of them are fucking glued to them, and there's an excitement and a fucking on their face. They have to say, we are fucking fully behind you, and even though, taking Rain O'Neill off the other day and things like that, is a big personality, big call, but the respect they have for him, Ledge, and surely that respect has stood for Armagh, massively. It stood for them.
Yeah, actually, they showed on the big screen in Croke Park when he took Rain O'Neill off. He really got into him over something. I don't know what happened, but there was no kind of hanging around to see Rain will produce something for us. He whipped him off, and there was no second thoughts about it. And that kind of ties into, he has a panel that he can trust, and that's taken a lot of time to, Christ, above 10 years of just inter-county management with Armagh alone is ferocious levels of commitment. I can't imagine how much, I know his wife is physio. I'd say he's just totally, beset by GA. But and you know what, I am, Armagh probably get no credit for the Roscommon game, to be honest with you, because they were favourites. It looked like one of the easier draws. Roscommon have had a patchy championship, but it was an awkward one for them. And look, Armagh weren't fantastic at all, I don't think. But the fact that every one of those players, obviously they came out with the plan of 15 behind the 45 for the whole day. This is what we're doing, and we talked before about Tyrone giving Roscommon an environment to flourish. Armagh didn't give them the environment to flourish. And it didn't matter what like whether you thought you were the best player in the field or whether you were too good to be inside the 45, every one of those Armagh lads just went back and did what they were asked to do because they saw the bigger picture. And look, it worked a treat. You know, they probably, yes, they could have been a bit more efficient and everything else, but I don't think we can underestimate how big, as you said, how big a monkey off the back that is for Armagh. And like, I saw Aidan Forker sprinting down the sideline, kind of cheering and celebrating. And I was thinking, Jesus, Aidan, relax, will you? It's only you're only after beating Roscommon. And I texted into the group, but in hindsight, we probably don't realise the significance of that win for them. Massive. You know, it's probably a massive, massive win for them. So, look, I think they're in a really good spot now, to be honest with you. And I think they're actually, I think they've got a nice blend that Kerry will find awkward. Like, we'll talk about Kerry and Derry very briefly later. But, like, Kerry really struggled with Derry yesterday. Derry just ran out of legs. Armagh have got more of an energy, more of a pep in their step than Derry will have, and they'll still do something similar defensively to what Derry did. So, look, I think they're in a really good spot, and they'll be coming in as underdogs, which I think is absolutely beautiful from the Armagh's point of view.
Good place to be.
You know?
Yeah, good place to be. And Ryan, like Daniel talked about that, like within about a minute, you could see very clearly Armagh straight back, you know, suffocate the space, take out Roscommon's energy. And Roscommon's energy is their forwards. You know, Roscommon have good forwards. Diarmaid Murder, you know, Enda Smith, well, Ben O'Carroll's missing obviously at the weekend. You've got Cox there as well. You've got Donny still floating about as well. You know, like, listen, Dara Craig's had a brilliant season for his university as well. A real bright young talent coming through, and they destroyed Tyrone. But like, I was just watching some of Diarmaid's scores, like Diarmaid Murder's scores against Tyrone, and the other day, like Diarmaid got no sniff at all. Like he was snuffed out. There was plenty of bodies in around that D area. You know, they struggle to break them down at times. And albeit now, to be fair to Roscommon, Ryan, you know, they were dealt, like David Murray's a real warrior. Two warriors, David Murray and Alton Harney, both went off injured in the first 14 minutes. Big blow for them, you know, particularly when you're playing Armagh on a wet, greasy day. You know, you sort of need your warriors, you need your characters. Like, and I know Alton's a big heartbeat of that team. Like, but certainly, like from an Armagh perspective, like I would probably call the performance, Ryan, professional. That was probably the best way to describe it.
Yeah, Stephen, you've summed it up there perfectly. Like, at the end of the day, we were talking about Roscommon's firepower up front, and people might say Armagh getting 14, 15 behind the ball, whatever it is. Look, them boys are training since October. At the end of the day, the only thing that matters to them and McGeaney in the backroom team is winning. Yeah. And I don't care what neutrals are saying that are going to Croke Park to watch the game, or what people on social media are saying. It's all about winning. And when I look back, Roscommon, Donny Smith scoreless, Dara Craig scoreless, Enda Smith scoreless, Diarmaid Murtagh only scored a point. Yeah. So you have to give massive credit to McGeaney and his management team for, I suppose, coming up with a game plan to completely take them Roscommon forwards out of it. And that was all that mattered. If they'd done that, they had a massive chance. And the other side of it is, them boys have been on that journey for 10 years. There was a lot of pressure. We're talking about England now in the Euros, and a lot of pressure. And obviously, Armagh's a proud footballing county. Like, they expect to be in semi-finals. That's where they feel they belong. And they haven't been there in such a long time. So there was pressure going into that game. And probably what stood out to me was that the so-called big leaders, like Rian O'Neill was quiet, was taken off, as you mentioned. Soupy Campbell didn't start.
Yeah.
If Armagh would have lost that game, we'd be saying, what was McGeaney at taking off Rian O'Neill? What was he at not starting Soupy Campbell? And you got to give a lot of respect for McGeaney that he's brave enough to make these decisions. And the so-called lesser players, if you like I'm looking at Barry McCambridge, played very little football until this last few games. He scored 1-2. Oisín Conady, find of the year, 0-4. Turbo, step forward, scored 1-2. So that's a great sign that Armagh were able to win this game with their so-called star players, probably not playing at the levels that we would expect of them. And look, I'm delighted for Armagh. For them to constantly come back after being put down, that shows a great amount of leadership as well, that they don't throw the toys out of the pram just because they've been dealt one or two killer blows. So fair play to them. And as you said, there'll be an unbelievable buzz within Armagh on Ireland semi against Kerry.
Yeah, I'd say the people of South Armagh as well, particularly around Cross McLean, would be delighted, Ryan, with that comparison to England as well. Getting the semi-final of the Euros, I'd say there'd be a great buzz around the village. But on a serious note, though, lads, you know, Barry McCambridge had played very little football, Ryan, there up until a few weeks ago, as you said, the trust that they have in the squad as well. But certainly, legend. We talked about this Dublin team. One of the greatest things about that Dublin team was their finishing power. I don't mean finishing power as in their ability to take scores. Their finishing power coming off the bench. This is something we would have chatted to. I remember chatting to Donny Buckley years ago about this, where he talked about Lee Keegan following Kieran Kilkenny for 45, 50 minutes. Kilkenny running the legs of Keegan, and then Keegan seeing Kilkenny getting hooked and seeing a McManaman coming on and all of a sudden coming in fresh and Keegan starting to wane. I'm not just picking out Keegan there an example, but I'm just saying any defender in Mayo. And you look at Armagh's finishing power here, Ledge. Stephen Campbell, powerful runner, really dynamic player, would probably get on the most forward lines in Ulster. You've got Oisin O'Neill, okay, he's coming back in a bit of form. Ross McQuillan, who's a finisher, real good player. Aidan Nugent and Jason Duffy, both who have won All Ireland intermediate club medals with their club, Cullyhanna, McKeever's club himself. Like, and I know how much McKeever thinks of Nugent and Duffy. Like, Nugent and Duffy were ever present last year in the team, and all of a sudden they have to be satisfied now with coming off the bench. But having that bench Ledge is so fucking vitally important. And I just don't feel that Kerry have as strong a bench. I really don't. Like, and I do feel that if this game can go down the stretch, Armagh can stay in it, bring that finishing power off the bench. Like, I think they have a real chance here of really getting to a final.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like you could see from the 4 games over the weekend, so much of the damage, especially in Croke Park, so much of the damage is done in the last 15 minutes. Like it's only then at that stage the games are really starting.
It breaks into a game.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. You know, you could nearly switch it off for the first 40 minutes and then come in and you can see what's really going to happen. And I think that was I just on Dublin, I think that was Dublin's issue. They burned lads too early when the slogan match was going on and did nothing. They, as you said, did nothing to come in. Whereas like Campbell coming in at half time, what they scored two from play, 3 from play maybe. And then I think that freed up Connaughton a little bit more. He's playing a bit more forward of a role. He got 3 or 4 in the second half. And McQuillan, even as you're saying, and look, I'd be saying that look, it's very easy to keep a panel happy when you're winning All Ireland's winning the whole time. Armagh haven't been winning All Ireland's; they haven't been winning the whole time, and he's managed to keep the same group of lads happy.
Well, six consecutive quarterfinal defeats, lads. 6 consecutive quarterfinal defeats. That's hard to come back, and I'd say most of those players were involved in all 6 of those. Like, you know what I mean? It's hard to keep coming back. Hard to keep.
It really is. Like, it really is, and look, I think it's a good nod to what McGeeney's built, and kind of I'm not surprised either because you can see even in Kildare what he built, like, and we don't know about Kildare, but like that's he had a real good group there, and they all ate out of the palm of his hand, and you can see that in Armagh as well. But no, I'm delighted for them. I'm really excited for Kerry Armagh. I think it just reminds me of the early 2000s, you know, and what's his name Benny used to be in the nets with big steel toe caps and kicking it out from the 6-yard box.
Fancy Bellew and Big Donaghy knocking two each other. Like, but listen, Kieran Donaghy, Ryan, like having him in their camp now is going to be absolutely priced. Like Big Joe O'Connor, he's sort of a new kid on the block in the middle of the field for Kerry. Know very little about him. I watched him yesterday. He was involved in all sorts of shenanigans off the ball as well. And let's be honest, lads, Kerry are not whiter than white. Like, they're not whiter than white. And like a couple of boys that were around me yesterday, Kerry, both giving out about Derry and this and that, and I'm sort of thinking, look, you're fond of a bit yourselves. Like, you know, before the ball was thrown in, Shawnee O'Shea had smashed into Oran Lynch. He followed him up the field in the first play. He was niggling at him. He was mouthing at him. You know, Clifford was fond of throwing a few digs back as well. Like, so they're let's be honest, like, lads, Kerry are no angels. Like, they're no angels. Like, and Big Joe O'Connor there in the middle of the field yesterday was involved in everything. Him and McVall were at it. Him and McKeag were at it, you know, and you could see that. Like, and obviously nice guys win nothing, so you have to have that element of edge, Ryan. But certainly Donaghy's inside influence. Like, he's actually a club mate of Donaghy's. He's Austin Stack's man, Big O'Connor. But Damon O'Connor had another horse of the game yesterday as well. Like, and it will be a real battle in that middle of the field. But certainly Ryan, Donaghy's influence now over the next few weeks will be hugely. His knowledge.
Yeah, well, he'll be keeping his ear to the ground, and I suppose that's where, you know, you want a tight camp within Kerry. Even simple things about where his players going to play, matchups, etc. So I've no doubt that Armagh will be trying to lean on Donaghy as much as they can. The thing that impressed me about Kerry yesterday, Stephen, was defensively. Like, we all know about Kerry and they can get lovely scores and all that. Defensively, geez, I thought they were good. Like, they held Derry to 10 points. Derry, with their attacking power, can usually breeze up to 10 points after half time. The thing about them is they can match up. Like, I'm looking at Derry's half back line yesterday. Now, I know this probably took away from Derry a wee bit, but Owen McAvoy went man to man on Sean O'Shea. But McAvoy is usually an attacking threat, didn't score yesterday. Conor Doherty, an attacking threat, didn't score. Gareth McIlnis didn't score. Ethan Doherty didn't score. Like, Paul Cassidy, 1 point. And you might say, well, maybe Derry weren't firing, but I feel that Kerry have really tightened up. And on the flip side of that, Paddy Talley is just down the road. He's in Galway, Tyrone, man. So I think he has added a lot to Kerry, obviously, in that department. And also, he'll be keeping his ear to the ground to see what's going on over in Armagh as well. But it'll make for a fascinating game. I still feel Kerry are very reliant on the two Cliffords. And yesterday, the two Cliffords were very quiet. And for a large period of that game, you didn't know who was going to win it. Now, I know Kerry pulled away in the end, but see, going into the last 10 minutes, it was anybody's game.
Clifford had one free and one mark ledge. I thought the first 5 minutes, he was gonna burn McKaig. I seen him getting away from McKaig. I thought, Jesus, Chrissy could be in trouble here today. But Chrissy McKaig's discipline, from a man-to-man point of view, from a matchup point of view, was a great education for any young player, who's asked to do a job on an opposition player in a matchup, because everybody has their own strengths or whatever. Like, and Chrissy's a Cloyd, creepy defender who really, really has great discipline in his defending as well. And I think he's 35 this year as well. Like, so he's no spring chicken. Like, and to keep himself in that condition playing hurling and football is a tribute to Chrissy. Like, but I thought Clifford was kept well quiet, but still edge at the same time. The 10 different scores yesterday. Kerry had 10 different scores in a low scoring encounter. Like, and you're sort of thinking to yourself, they do have that ability to kick scores in Croke Park, but I do feel, Edge, how important will it be if Armagh can shut down the supply to Clifford, particularly from Paddy and Brosnan, whatever, it could just give them the edge in this.
Yeah, so there's a couple of pieces in this, and look, to be honest with you, I know a lot of people are saying Derry were fucking disastrous and all the rest of it. I thought Derry laid the template for 50 minutes of how to beat this Kerry team. If Derry hadn't had to go to extra time the week before, and look, this is the punishment. This is why you finish first in your group. That's the reality. But I thought Derry actually just ran out of juice, and that attacking power from the half back line, I just wasn't there because I think it was fatigue. But like, it was 8-all. I think with 55 minutes gone, it was 8-all.
And Derry gave away point in it in the 60th minute. Yeah,
do and Derry gave away 2 or 3 really sloppy turnovers that have kind of been surrounding them all year. But it was like I was impressed that Kerry didn't blink first. I'll give them that much, right? They'd really and look, I know it was a shit show of a game, and we're not trying to pretend that it wasn't. Like, it was hard watch, but I'm surprised Kerry stuck with it. To be perfectly honest, I thought they'd blink sooner, and they were happy to take it at a snail's pace. But I think that Armagh have the template of how to really ruffle into Kerry, and it is playing, and that's kind of what Armagh have been doing anyway. Like, if they borrow that Derry template and add a little bit more to it in the other direction, I think it's going to be a really tricky game for Kerry, because this was a big one for Kerry, like, especially the Mickey Hart factor. There's always a thing there with Tyrone and Kerry over the years that Tyrone always had Kerry's number, Mickey Hart always had Jack O'Connor's number.
Yeah,
that was a big game. I don't know if Kerry want to go and do the exact same thing again next week or 2 weeks' time. I'm not sure they want to play that game the way it was played. So if I was Armagh, and again, look, this is just purely from a tactical coaching point of view, and maybe it's not even tactics, but I would be taking this game the exact same way that Derry did. But I think Armagh will have more energy and they'll have more fervour to get forward. The other aspect, and they kind of mentioned this on the game last night, I think you can overmatch up sometimes. I think you can, if you have all 6 backs doing tagging jobs, it totally takes away from your game. You 100%. Like 100%. halfbacks, as far as I'm concerned, are the most influential players at the moment on the pitch, because they can create so much coming from deep. Like, look at Patrick Morgan yesterday from Donegal. Like, you had him in a matchup yesterday, he doesn't score 3 or 4 from play. I think probably Derry overmatched up a small bit, to be perfectly honest. Like, Clifford absolutely needs a matchup. I'm not so sure Paddy probably does as well. After that, I think you have to go and play your system, play the way you play, because it takes too much away from your game. And I think Derry struggled a little bit, like, because Derry are a deep running team. That's their game, So look, it's an interesting one. I'm really looking forward to that game, especially. I think if Armagh go and play all out, I think we could have an absolute classic. Like, I think it could be a cracking game. I don't think Armagh will win that. I think Armagh need to do what Derry did, and then for the last 15 minutes, then use their power, use their athleticism to really bring them down the end line,
And that's one thing for sure. They'll certainly be well primed from a conditioning point of view. Ryan, the last game today, Donegal and Louth. Louth had a fantastic season, Ryan. Some brilliant footballers in Louth as well. Like, I've seen that at close hand actually in working in the league at the minute. Like, there's some brilliant talent in Louth, and as Ledge said as well, their under 20s coming through as well, or a good bunch. I think they're even better next year, which is brilliant for the county, for such a small county. They're a great template, Ryan. I think, I'm not saying patronising here, but they are a great template for any small county who are sort of sitting about going, the gap's too big. They were fucking thinking getting into that game 100%. We have a massive chance of getting that semi-final here. Like, they really believed it. They were in the same division as Donegal this year. We've got to remember that as well. They played at a similar level in the league. You know what? But again, what Ledge said, I thought what they looked like, particularly in the second half, was just a little bit tired. They ran out of legs a wee bit. I think the fact that they're probably working off a small squad, they've picked up a few knocks as well. Kieran Downey was a massive loss to them as well. There are a couple of other injuries. And I think that probably just caught up with them, Ryan, a wee bit. But two standout things for me, Ryan, tactically. I want your take on this. Like, Donegal were very good at the game. I know the Sunday game, Ledge, I texted you, they had highlighted the complete opposite. I felt differently. Donegal were very good at sending 7 or 8 men in deep into the Louth scoring zone. And I think one of the reasons for that was very strategic. Sorry, I think against Dublin and against Cork, Louth had a very rigid defensive system, so they were nearly marking zonally rather than man to man. But then all of a sudden now that banishes your zone. You have to pick those players up, and there was little clusters popping up in around the 6-yard box. There was little clusters popping up around the D. And I know Canavan and that talked about a crowd in the space, Ryan, but certainly what it did for me, it was disrupted Louth's defensive shape. It opened up driving channels for the likes of McHugh and Owen Ban Gallagher. It opened up little pockets of space for a wee kicking, a wee pop pass for a mark, you know, or to release someone. And you could see McBurdy sending boys in, and they were very good at rotating the men inside, so they were coming in and out, and that had a serious level of disruption on Louth's system, Ryan. But you know, again, it's just something different that McGuinness brought to the table, I suppose. You know, from an analysis point of view and a tactical point of view, he's really geared on, like really geared on.
Yeah, I think we knew Louth were going to set up a blanket defence, Stephen, where they had 14 sitting inside the 45. And probably we've talked here where we said a lot of teams struggle once they face that. You got to have a clear game plan. Donegal had a clear game plan. It made sense to send 5, 6, 7 players. And as you said, they were right in on the penalty spot.
Yeah.
If you're Louth and you let 5, 6, 7 players go and stand in there unopposed or not being marked touch tight, then you run the risk of, like Kieran Thompson, threading lovely balls through to them. So all of a sudden, Louth had to track these 5, 6, 7 players that were just hanging, as you said, in really deep on top of the penalty spot, which then created more one-on-ones further out the pitch. When I talk about the top of the D out to the 45, and that's where Donegal are at their most powerful. Like, I'm going to go through Donegal's back 6 and 2 midfielders here. They scored, which the way they lined them out, Conor O'Donnell, fair enough, was lined out cornerback because he came in for Mark Kern. Obviously, he didn't play there. Mogan got 5, McHugh got 2, Owen Ban got a goal, Conor O'Donnell got 2, Michael Langan got 3 points from midfield, and Kieran Moore was wearing number 8, I think. He got 2 points.
Yeah.
That is 114 from their back 8 as such. 6 defenders and 2 midfielders, 114. So, of course, it made sense for McGuinness, tactically, send bodies in, occupy Louth's blanket defence in deep, and then all of a sudden our runners from deep are just going to tear them apart. And see their runners from deep, McHugh, Mogan, Kieran Moore with the pace. Them boys are phenomenal. They one-on-ones, they're going at you. Then all of a sudden there's a reverse pass. McHugh's coming the opposite way. And in fairness, I thought Donegal's attack and play from deep was outstanding. 123. They barely missed. Now, in saying that, Louth initially were able to, you know, turn them over a few times, but it was just Donegal were relentless. See their pace that the attack was from deep. I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah.
I would give a lot of credit though still to Louth. I thought boys, like they were an All-Ireland quarter final.
Tommy Durnian, Ryan, middle of the field, had a horse of a game, 4 points. Brilliant game, real warrior, like, you know.
Brilliant game. And look, Grimes tried his best. Unfortunately, you know, he had a couple of shots that didn't go over for him. But I would give a lot of credit to Louth. I thought they remained in the game for as long as they could. As you said, they just became a wee bit ragged towards the end, and probably they had to force it once that gap opened out to 4 and 5 points, and that played into Donegal's hands because they're the masters at counter-attacking.
Yeah.
But Jesus, credit to Ger Brennan and that Louth team. Like, to get that to an All-Ireland quarter final and get that level of performance, it was only 11-8 at half time. I think, as you said, Louth are a template for a lot of teams that probably don't see themselves as a top 8, top 10 team in Ireland.
And Ledge, one of the standout things for me was the 52nd minute of the game. If anybody gets a chance to watch the game back, just watch it. Like, 52nd minute of the game, I was sitting on the 45 in the Cusick, just right behind right in line with it. And Sean Patton put the ball down. Louth had gone man to man in the press. Donegal had a bit of a sort of a wee bit of a cluster in the middle of the field, sort of shadow boxing, but they were just bringing Louth into the middle. The cornerback, I think it was Keelan McColgan, who had just come on a sub, just took off down the sideline 45 metres, and Patton just opened the body up and just pinged one right. And it was just he didn't even break stride. McColgan just moved onto the ball with one bounce. and he flicked it inside, 2 passes, it's over the bar. And I've always said this, Ledge, like, you know, your kickouts are a platform to launch attacks from. Sean Patton, no better in the business of doing it. But interestingly, when Louth went zonal in the first half, when they got those couple of free kicks with Sam Maguire, they dropped off a lot of kickouts. But when they did go zonal with 3 banks of 4, they actually won a couple of kickouts in a row against Patton. You know, and I'm sort of thinking to myself, surely Galway will look at that now and they'll think, you know what, maybe going with a bit of a zonal press against this man, because if you go man-to-man in Croke Park, Sean Patton's going to cut you open. He's going to cut you open. And it's still actually surprising, Les, the amount of teams now that are actually, even for the bunch and break, are still at inter-county level marking man-to-man. I can't get it. What is it like?
Yeah, I don't know. I've had this conversation. Our goalkeeper Sylvester's was in with Dublin as well, and they did an awful lot. Like, and we're trying to say, like, ask him, you know what? But he was kind of saying, well, they trusted their power and pace, that man to man, they were all physically faster and stronger than the people they were marking, so they trusted that, you know. So, but how many teams can do that? Like, how many teams can trust their pace and power? And I don't know. I like even Derry and Kerry. Like, I mean, Shane Ryan had an easy ride yesterday, I thought. Like, I mean, Derry went man to man as well, and especially for a team who's trying to conserve energy.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, go zonal and you save so
mental amount of same kickouts that Kerry got away, actually. Like,
unbelievable little intermediate kind of ones to the 45. I couldn't get over it, but I think Galway probably found something in the last 15 minutes, and well, maybe bits of the second half when they went after Dublin a little bit more. I think they're set up. I think they're primed for a zonal press. They really are. Like, we've talked about the size they have at the back of their press. Very similar, actually. They match up quite well to Donegal. Like, that's going to be some battle of giants around the middle of the field. Like, I've talked a lot about Donegal's size around the middle. That's going to be a great battle between those kind of 4 lads. But listen, you can't, and that's probably a big advantage for Donegal having Patton, and I still think Gleeson is a bit iffy from the Galway side of things, and I think they're going to be 2 very evenly matched teams, but that could be a big advantage for Donegal, I feel. But just a really brief point, kind of backtracking a small bit. We were talking about Donegal sending the numbers in, right? And it's really interesting contrast for me. Roscommon did the very same against Armagh. Right, and they put, I think is it Murray, the cornerback, he was inside a good few times. Yeah. They had 4 and 5 players a lot of the time inside the Armagh 21, and they created loads of one-on-ones on the 45. But because Armagh were physically stronger, Roscommon could take no advantage of that one-on-one, and they ended up turning over a huge amount of ball around 45, trying to put little intricate kick passes or getting turned over in physical contact. But it's really, this goes back to coaching your team to do what suits them, you know. So we can't be this copycat thing where, oh, well, everyone sends their numbers inside, you know, just to break down a blanket defence. That doesn't suit everyone. I think Roscommon missed the trick there by putting so many lads in and just standing with no actual intent of getting on the ball, you know, and compare that to, and I do agree with you. I thought Donegal, it was very
like the likes of Owen Van Gallagher getting on the ball, you know, and McHugh, who can drop a shoulder or pick off a weak side or whatever, you know, those guys are completely different. You actually want to be strategic in who you want on the ball and who you want actually inside, you know.
100%. And Roscommon an awful lot of the time got left isolated on 45 with 2 or 3 against 4 to 5 Armagh lads. But anyway, it's just interesting to see the way a lot of teams are doing the same things, and we saw probably all 4 teams at the weekend doing like, or all 8 teams doing kind of similar-ish things. But the quality, I think there was a real disparity in the quality of how some teams were doing and how other teams were doing it. But I'm really hopeful for a good 2 semi-finals, because I don't think I'm giving away any secrets. I think the weekend was a small bit underwhelming outside of Galway Dublin. You know?
Yeah, no, it certainly was. But Ryan, 2 good semi-finals, Armagh and Kerry. What's your call?
I still think Kerry will win that, Stephen. I'd love to see Armagh win it, but I still think Kerry will win it. I feel Galway will beat Donegal. The one thing I would say, we're talking about them runners from deep, and Donegal are the masters at it. How Cork caused Donegal trouble was Cork's front line made contact early. So I'm thinking, you know, the way normally your front line is probably your weakest defenders, because there are a lot of them forwards. When you're playing against Donegal, you need your front line nearly to be your strongest defenders, because it's McHugh, Hogan and Owen Band. These are the boys coming at you, and if you're a weak forward that doesn't like tackling, they're just going by you, and all of a sudden there's an overlap. So that's something that Comer, in fairness, if he can get tackles on, Walsh will probably have to up his game in that department. Finnerday will probably have to up his game. So that's something for Joyce to think about. How is he going to deal with these runners from deep? Because I feel that's the way Donegal are going to play against Galway as well.
Yeah,
but I still feel if Galway get everybody back, match fit, get a good game plan, I still feel they have the tools to beat them.
Yeah. Ledge, what's your take on?
I still think I think Kerry are wildly susceptible still, I think, and yesterday highlighted that more than ever for me. Like, it's if Derry weren't fatigued, they'd have been right there. And I tell you, a big moment in that game would have been the Gareth McKinley's chance, the first play. If Derry had a lead going into the last 15 minutes, and that goal would have, like, it was a 1 point game for most of it, or level for most of the game. If Derry got 3 or 4 points up, I think Kerry would have really struggled in that last 15 minutes. The game opened up totally when Derry had to chase it. If that goal goes in, Derry gets their tails up, I think it's a totally different game. So I think Kerry are fucking wildly susceptible to still being caught by a team like this. The caveat is, Armagh, in their biggest day since 2005, can they hit those levels of performance? Will they be suffocated by the occasion? Kerry won't be suffocated by the occasion. You saw them yesterday. It was a real kind of almost downbeat celebration. They'll have no other expectation other than All-Ireland win at this stage now with Dublin gone. So if Armagh can keep themselves nice and level and not get too hot and bothered by the whole thing, I think they have a massive chance of winning. And I'd give them a small little nod. I always think every game Armagh play is going to go to penalties, so I'm going to say extra time again. But the other one, Donegal and Galway, is, I think Galway with injuries looming over them are susceptible. So I would probably go for Donegal there, and I think McGuinness is coming in under the radar here. He'll have loads to work on. Conceding 18 points to Louth, that he'll be beating that into his lads for the next 2 weeks. I think we could see an Armagh Donegal final. Imagine.
Yeah, and we were in the Athletic Grounds for the first meeting this year, and it was a draw game, and then obviously they met in the Division 2 final, met in the Ulster final, and maybe it's a bit of fate then waiting for them, the two of them, to meet again in the final. I don't think the word penalties is one to be mentioned in the Armagh camp, lads. I think McGeady would take a late winner in extra time or normal time. I don't think he wants to get through that turmoil again. Listen, lads, thanks a million, and we'll be back obviously after the semi-finals, and we'll get a chat about the Tailteann final as well. It's coming up down in Laois, play on the same day as one of the semi-finals. So we'll review the 3 games, lads, after the semi-finals. But listen, man, thanks a million, and enjoy the semi-finals. Chat to you soon.
Thanks, lads. See you later.